The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of El Paso, Texas, and Annabelle Zimmerman knew her husband was dead before she even reached the saloon doors. It was August of 1878, and the heat pressed down on the town like a heavy wool blanket soaked in sweat. Annabelle stood frozen on the wooden walkway, her basket of fresh bread tumbling from her hands as the loaves scattered across the weathered planks. Inside the Golden Spur saloon, she could hear men shouting, the crash of furniture, and then an eerie silence that made her blood run cold. She was 23 years old and had been married to Thomas Zimmerman for 5 years. 5 years of building a small ranch on the outskirts of town. 5 years of dreaming about the family they would raise together. 5 years of believing that their hard work would pay off. Now, as the saloon doors swung open and Sheriff Morrison emerged with his hat in his hands and that terrible look in his eyes, those 5 years crumbled to dust. "Mrs. Zimmerman," the sheriff said softly, approaching her with careful steps as if she were a spooked horse. "I am so sorry." There was a dispute over a cattle deal. Thomas, he drew first, but Jake Brennan was faster. Annabelle felt the world tilt sideways. Her vision narrowed to a pinpoint, and she would have fallen if the sheriff had not caught her arm. Self-defense, they would call it. Legal. Jake Brennan, the wealthiest rancher in the county, would face no consequences for putting a bullet through her husband's heart. The funeral was held 3 days later under a merciless sun. Annabelle stood beside the fresh grave in her black dress, the fabric clinging to her skin in the oppressive heat. 17 people attended, most of them neighbors who had little to spare but gave their time anyway. Jake Brennan did not attend, but he sent a wreath of expensive flowers that Annabelle refused to place on the grave. After everyone left, she remained there until the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and purple. She had no tears left. She had cried them all in the privacy of her small ranch house, where Thomas's presence still lingered in every corner. The ranch. That was her immediate problem. She owned 160 acres, a modest herd of cattle, 3 horses, and a house that needed constant repairs. She also owed money to the bank, money Thomas had borrowed to expand their operation. The loan payment was due in 3 months, and she had no idea how she would manage it alone. 2 weeks after the funeral, Jake Brennan made his intentions clear. He arrived at her ranch in a polished carriage, dressed in a fine suit that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. He was a broad man in his mid-40s with silver threading through his dark hair and cold eyes that never quite smiled even when his mouth did. "Mrs. Zimmerman," he said, removing his hat as he stood on her porch, "I have come to make you an offer." Annabelle stood in the doorway, blocking his entrance. "I am not interested in selling. You have not heard my offer yet. I do not need to hear it. This ranch is not for sale." Brennan's smile tightened. "Be reasonable. You cannot run this place alone. A woman has no business trying to manage cattle and land. I will give you a fair price, enough to relocate to town and live comfortably." "Fair," Annabelle repeated, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Like the fair fight you had with my husband." The pretense of friendliness dropped from Brennan's face. "Your husband drew on me in front of a dozen witnesses. I defended myself. That is all. Get off my property. You are making a mistake. This land will fail without a man to run it, and when it does, I will buy it from the bank for a fraction of what I am offering now." "Then I suppose you will have to wait and see if you are right," Annabelle said, and shut the door in his face. She leaned against the closed door, her heart pounding, listening to his footsteps retreat across the porch and the sound of his carriage pulling away. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the rough wood until the trembling stopped. That night, she sat at her kitchen table with Thomas's ledger spread before her, working the numbers by lamplight. The situation was worse than she had realized. Even if she managed to keep the cattle alive and get them to market, she would barely make enough to cover the loan payment, let alone pay for supplies to get through the winter. She needed help. She needed a ranch hand, someone who could repair fences, manage the cattle, and handle the heavy work that she simply could not do alone. But hiring help required money she did not have. The answer came a week later in the form of a drifter. Annabelle was in town buying flour and salt with the last of her cash when she saw him. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days of stubble shadowing his jaw. He sat on a bench outside the general store, his hat pulled low, looking like a man with nowhere to go and no hurry to get there. What caught her attention was not his appearance, but the way he was watching the street. His eyes, a striking shade of blue even from a distance, moved constantly, taking in everything around him with the alertness of someone who had learned to anticipate trouble before it found him. "That is Dalton Jackson," the store owner, Mr. Peters, said when he noticed her looking. "Rode into town yesterday. Been asking around for work, but nobody is hiring." "Why not?" Annabelle asked. Mr. Peters shrugged. "He is a drifter. Here today, gone tomorrow. Most folks want someone more permanent." Annabelle studied the stranger for a long moment. He looked capable, and more importantly, he looked like someone who would work for food and a place to sleep rather than demanding wages she could not pay. She walked outside, her purchases bundled in her arms, and approached him directly. "Are you looking for work?" Dalton Jackson looked up at her, surprise flickering across his face before it settled back into careful neutrality. "Depends on the work. Ranch hand. I need someone to help with the cattle, repairs, general labor. You got a ranch, about an hour's ride north of here. 160 acres. He stood, and she realized he was quite tall, well over 6 feet. "What is the pay, room and board, and a percentage of the profit when I sell the herd in the fall, if there is any profit?" Dalton studied her face, and she felt exposed under his gaze as if he could see right through to all her desperation and fear. "You are the widow," he said finally. "I heard about what happened. Then you know my situation. I know that Jake Brennan wants your land, and I know that anybody who stands between him and what he wants has a way of running into trouble. Are you saying you are not interested?" Dalton looked past her, down the main street of El Paso to where the sun beat down on the dusty road. "I am saying I want to know what I am walking into. I am trying to keep my home," Annabelle said simply. "That is all. If you are worried about Brennan, I will not blame you for refusing. But I need help and you need work, and that seems like something we can both use right now." He was quiet for so long that she thought he would say no. Then he nodded once. "All right, when do we start?" "Now, if you have a horse." "Got one at the livery." "Then go get him and meet me at the north end of town. I will wait for you there." The ride to the ranch was mostly silent. Annabelle led the way on her mare, a sturdy chestnut named Copper, while Dalton followed on a gray gelding that had seen better days but looked sound enough. She glanced back at him occasionally, still uncertain if she had made the right decision by bringing a complete stranger to her home. When they crested the low rise that overlooked her property, she stopped to let him take it in. The ranch house was small but well built, with a wraparound porch that Thomas had added their second year. The barn needed a new roof, and several sections of fence were in sorry shape, but the land itself was good, with a creek running through the eastern section that never ran dry even in the worst drought. "It is not much," she said, hating the defensive note in her voice. "It is more than most people have," Dalton replied, and there was no judgment in his tone, just statement of fact. She showed him to the small bunkhouse behind the main barn. It was dusty from disuse and sparsely furnished with just a cot, a chair, and a small wood stove, but it had a solid roof and walls that would keep out the weather. "I will bring you some blankets and supplies," she said from the doorway. "Supper is at 6. I expect you to work from sunup to sundown, same as I do." "Understood, and Mr. Jackson, if you steal from me or cause me any trouble, I will shoot you myself. I want that clear from the start." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost but not quite a smile. "Understood, Mrs. Zimmerman." That first week was a test for both of them. Annabelle had never considered herself particularly trusting, and having a strange man on her property kept her on edge. She locked her doors at night and kept Thomas's rifle loaded and within reach. But Dalton proved to be a hard worker. He repaired 20 yards of fence the first 3 days, rebuilt the chicken coop that had been sagging for months, and treated her livestock with the kind of easy competence that spoke of long experience. He spoke little, answering her questions with few words and never volunteering information about himself. She learned that he was 27 years old, that he had been working ranches and farms across Texas for the past several years, and that he had no family to speak of. Beyond that, he kept his past locked behind those watchful blue eyes. On the 8th day, trouble came. Annabelle was in the garden behind the house, picking tomatoes for supper, when she heard riders approaching. 3 men on horseback came up the main road to her house, and she recognized 2 of them as hands from the Brennan ranch. The third was Ray Brennan, Jake's younger brother and foreman of his operation. She set down her basket and walked around to the front of the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Dalton had been working on the barn roof, and she saw him climb down the ladder and move to stand near the porch, his hand resting casually on his belt near where she knew he kept a knife. "Mrs. Zimmerman," Ray Brennan said, not bothering to dismount. He was a harder man than his brother, all sharp angles and cold efficiency. "We have been having some trouble with cattle going missing, found tracks leading toward your property." "I have not seen any stray cattle," Annabelle said evenly. "Mind if we take a look around, just to be sure?" "Yes, I do mind. If you have a problem with missing cattle, take it to the sheriff." "We are trying to handle this neighborly-like," Ray said, his eyes sliding to Dalton. "Who is this, my ranch hand?" "New hire. What is your name?" Dalton met his gaze without flinching. "Dalton Jackson." "You know anything about missing cattle, Jackson?" "I know that if you want to search this property, you need the sheriff and a warrant." Ray's jaw tightened. "That sounds like something a man with something to hide would say." "That sounds like something the law says," Dalton replied calmly. The tension stretched between them like a rope pulled taut. Finally, Ray jerked his horse's head around. "We will be watching this place," he said to Annabelle. "If we find proof you are harboring rustlers or stolen cattle, Jake will not be offering to buy you out anymore. He will be taking you to court." They rode off in a cloud of dust. Annabelle watched them go, her heart hammering against her ribs. When she turned, Dalton was watching her. "They are going to keep pushing," he said. "I know. Brennan wants you scared enough to sell. I will not scare. I can see that." He paused, then added, "But scared and careful are not the same thing. You should watch yourself when you go to town. Do not go alone if you can help it." Something in his voice made her ask, "Have you dealt with men like the Brennans before?" "I have dealt with all kinds of men." He turned back toward the barn. "I will check the fences on the north pasture this afternoon. Make sure none of our cattle wander off. Last thing you need is to actually lose stock and give them ammunition." Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Annabelle found herself relaxing around Dalton, no longer jumping at every sound he made or watching him with constant suspicion. He was reliable in a way that surprised her, always doing exactly what he said he would do. More than that, He seemed to understand what needed to be done without being told, spotting problems and fixing them before she even noticed they existed. They fell into an easy pattern at mealtimes. At first, she had him eat in the bunkhouse, bringing him a plate at supper time. But it felt wasteful to cook twice and eat alone in the big house, so after the first week, she invited him to eat at the kitchen table. Those meals were quiet at first, but gradually they began to talk. "Where did you learn to work cattle?" she asked one evening over beef stew. "My uncle had a ranch up in Oklahoma Territory, spent my summers there as a kid." "Is he still there?" "Died about 5 years back. The bank took the ranch." "I am sorry," Dalton shrugged. "He was old and tired." "I think he was ready to go." "What about your parents?" His expression closed off slightly. "My mother died when I was 12. My father was a soldier, killed in the war." She did not press further, recognizing the pain of old wounds. "Instead," she said, "Thomas and I bought this place right after we married. He had saved money working as a carpenter in Dallas, and I had a small inheritance from my mother. It was not much, but it was ours." "It is good land," Dalton said. "With the right management, you could build something substantial here." That was the plan. She set down her spoon, her appetite fading. "We were going to have children, expand the herd, maybe buy the adjacent property when old Mr. Henderson was ready to sell. We had so many plans." The grief hit her unexpectedly, as it often did, a wave that threatened to pull her under. She pressed her napkin to her eyes, mortified to be crying in front of him. "Sorry," she managed. "I thought I was past this." "Grief does not work on a schedule," Dalton said quietly. "My mother has been gone 15 years, and sometimes something will remind me of her, and it feels like it just happened yesterday." She looked at him across the table, and for the first time, she saw past his careful guard to the loneliness underneath. "Do you ever think about settling down somewhere, staying in one place?" "Sometimes, but I have not found a reason to stop moving yet." "Is that what you are looking for? A reason?" He met her eyes, and something passed between them, a connection she was not ready to name. "Maybe." The weather turned cooler as September arrived, bringing relief from the brutal summer heat. The cattle were fattening up nicely on the good grass near the creek, and Dalton had repaired nearly all the fence line. Annabelle began to think that maybe, just maybe, she might actually make it through this. Then Jake Brennan raised the stakes. She went to town alone one morning despite Dalton's advice, needing to speak with the banker about her loan. When she emerged from the bank, feeling slightly more hopeful after convincing them to give her until November to make her payment, she found 4 of Brennan's men waiting for her. "Mrs. Zimmerman," one of them said, a heavy-set man named Curtis she recognized from around town. "Mr. Brennan would like to speak with you." "Then Mr. Brennan knows where to find me." She tried to walk past them, but Curtis moved to block her path. "He is right over at the hotel. It will only take a minute." I said no. "We really think you should come along, madam." His hand closed around her upper arm, not quite hard enough to hurt but firm enough to make his intention clear. Fear spiked through her, but she kept her voice steady. "Take your hand off me. There's a problem here." Annabelle had never been so relieved to hear Dalton's voice. He stood behind the men, his stance relaxed but his eyes hard as flint. She had not even known he was in town. Curtis released her arm but did not back down. "This does not concern you, Drifter. Mrs. Zimmerman is my employer. That makes it my concern." 4 against 1, another of Brennan's men said. "You sure you want to make this your fight? I am sure you do not want to lay hands on a woman in the middle of town where the sheriff can see you." Dalton's voice was calm, almost conversational. "Bad look for your boss, roughing up a widow." The men exchanged glances, clearly uncertain. Finally, Curtis stepped back. "Tell your boss we will do this proper-like," he said to Annabelle. "Through the courts, but you are going to lose that ranch one way or another." They walked away, and Annabelle let out a shaky breath. "Thank you. I thought you were working on the south pasture fence. Finished early. Figured I would come into town for supplies." He studied her face. "You all right?" "Yes, just angry and scared, if I am honest. Come on, let's get what we need and get home." They walked together down the street to the general store. Annabelle was intensely aware of the whispers following them, the eyes watching from windows and doorways. A widow and her hired hand, a drifter with no roots and a reputation for trouble. The gossips would be talking about this for weeks. She found she did not care. That evening, after supper, they sat on the porch as the sun set. It had become a habit over the past weeks, these quiet moments when the work was done and the night was settling in. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, but Annabelle had come to treasure this time. "Dalton," she said, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "Why did you really take this job? You could have found work anywhere, probably for better pay." He was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then he said, "I have been drifting for 5 years now, moving from place to place, never staying long enough to matter. I guess I was tired of it, tired of being nobody to anybody." "You are not nobody," she said softly. "I was before I came here." He turned to look at her. "You gave me a chance when nobody else would. You trusted me with your home, your livelihood. That matters to me more than I expected it to." Something in his words, in the way he was looking at her, made her pulse quicken. The air between them felt charged, heavy with things unsaid. She realized with a start that she had been thinking about him differently lately, not as just a hired hand, but as a man. A good man who made her laugh sometimes, who listened when she talked about Thomas without judgment, who had somehow become essential to her days. "It matters to me too," she said. "Having you here, I mean. I do not think I could have managed without you. You are stronger than you think." "Maybe, but I am glad I did not have to find out." Their eyes held, and Annabelle felt something shift between them, like a door opening to a room she had not known existed. She thought he might reach for her hand, and she knew if he did, she would let him. But he stood instead, putting distance between them. "I should turn in," he said, his voice rough. "Early start tomorrow." "Yes. Good night, Dalton. Good night, Annabelle." It was the first time he had used her given name, and it sent warmth through her chest that had nothing to do with the lingering heat of the day. Over the next few weeks, the tension between them grew. It was there in the way their hands would brush when passing tools, in the extra moments their eyes would meet across the dinner table, in the awareness that seemed to hum in the air whenever they were in the same room. Annabelle had not expected to feel this way again, had not thought herself capable of it so soon after losing Thomas. The guilt was there, sharp and persistent, but so was this new feeling, this pull toward Dalton that she could not quite resist. She could see that he felt it too, and that he was fighting it just as hard as she was. He started keeping more distance between them, eating his meals quickly and retreating to the bunkhouse. He worked longer hours, coming in only after dark. She wanted to be relieved by this, but instead she found herself missing him, missing those conversations on the porch and the comfort of his steady presence. October brought the first real cold snap, and with it, a crisis. Annabelle woke one morning to find that several head of cattle had broken through a weak section of fence during the night and wandered onto Brennan's property. She and Dalton rode out at dawn to retrieve them, but when they arrived at the fence line, they found Ray Brennan and 6 of his men already there, the cattle penned up behind them. "These are my cattle," Annabelle said, struggling to keep her voice level. "They broke through the fence. I am here to take them home." "Funny thing about that," Ray said, leaning against his saddle horn. "These cattle got Brennan brands on them. That is impossible. Let me see them. Ray made no move to get out of her way. Sure looks like you have been rebranding stolen stock, Mrs. Zimmerman. That is a hanging offense in these parts. Dalton dismounted in one smooth motion, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. Let her see the cattle. You really want to draw on 6 men, Drifter? I really want you to stop lying and let us see those cattle. But if you want to make this uglier than it needs to be, that is your choice. The standoff lasted several heartbeats, the morning air thick with the possibility of violence. Then Sheriff Morrison rode up, apparently summoned by someone, though Annabelle could not imagine who. "What is going on here?" the sheriff demanded. Ray turned to him with a smile that made Annabelle's skin crawl. "Caught Mrs. Zimmerman trying to steal cattle, Sheriff. They have our brand on them clear as day." "That is a lie," Annabelle said. "Those are my cattle. They broke through my fence last night." The sheriff dismounted and walked over to inspect the penned cattle. Annabelle held her breath, praying she was right, that this was not some elaborate setup. The sheriff studied the brands for a long moment, then turned back to Ray with a frown. "These are Zimmerman brands, Ray. I can see where someone tried to alter them, but they did a poor job of it." "What are you saying?" "I am saying these cattle belong to Mrs. Zimmerman, and somebody tried to make it look like she had rebranded them. Now, I wonder who might have done that." Ray's face went dark with anger. "You calling me a liar, Sheriff? I am calling someone a liar and a cattle thief. Now, you can let Mrs. Zimmerman take her property home, or I can arrest you right now for attempted theft and fraud." For a moment, Annabelle thought Ray might actually draw on the sheriff. But finally, he jerked his head at his men, and they opened the makeshift pen. Dalton helped Annabelle drive the cattle back toward her property while the sheriff stayed behind to have words with Ray Brennan. They were halfway home before either of them spoke. "That was too close," Dalton said. "They tried to frame me. If the sheriff had not shown up, if he had not looked closely at those brands, I could have been arrested. Or worse." She looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" 6 armed men. No witnesses except me, and I am just a drifter with no credibility. If they had wanted to make you disappear, nobody would have looked too hard." The thought made her cold all the way through. Why would the sheriff help me? He has never seemed particularly friendly. Maybe he is honest. Or maybe Jake Brennan is finally pushing hard enough that even the people he usually controls are getting nervous. Dalton was quiet for a moment, then said, "Annabelle, this is not going to stop. Brennan wants your land, and he is going to keep coming at you until he gets it or something makes him back off permanently. What am I supposed to do? I cannot sell. I have nowhere else to go. You could marry again. A husband would give you legal protection and a man's name to hide behind." The suggestion hit her like a slap. "I do not want to marry someone just for protection. I know that. I am just saying it is an option. Well, it is not an option I am willing to consider." She kicked her horse into a faster walk, angry now though she could not fully articulate why. Maybe it was the fear still coursing through her veins. Or maybe it was because, hearing Dalton suggest she marry someone else, hurt in a way she had not expected. They did not speak the rest of the way home. That night, Annabelle lay in her bed unable to sleep, listening to the wind rattle the windows. She kept seeing Ray Brennan's face, the cold calculation in his eyes when he had tried to frame her. She kept thinking about how close she had come to losing everything, how fragile her grip on this life really was. She heard footsteps on the porch, the creak of the boards under someone's weight. Her hand went to the rifle beside her bed, her heart pounding. Then she heard Dalton's voice, low and steady. "It is just me. I saw your lamp was still lit. Wanted to make sure you were all right." She set down the rifle and pulled a shawl around her shoulders before opening the door. He stood on her porch in just his pants and undershirt, his hair mussed from sleep. "I am fine," she said. "Just could not sleep." "Me neither." He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight. "About what I said earlier about you marrying someone, that was out of line. Your choices are none of my business." "Why did you suggest it?" "Because I am worried about you. Because I do not know how to keep you safe from men like Brennan, and it scares me." The raw honesty in his voice made her chest ache. "I am scared too," she admitted. "But I will not marry someone I do not love just to hide behind his name. I did that once before, and I got lucky that Thomas turned out to be a good man. But I married him because I thought I should, because he was stable and kind and wanted me. I cared for him, but I did not love him, not really. Not the way a wife should love a husband." Dalton stared at her. "You did not love Thomas." "I grew to love him in my own way. But it was not the kind of love that sets your heart on fire. It was comfortable and safe, and I thought that was enough. Now I know what it feels like when it is not enough, when there is something more, something deeper and stronger, and I will not settle for less than that again." "Annabelle." Her name was rough on his lips. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I have been trying very hard not to care about you, Dalton Jackson. I have been telling myself it is too soon, that I am just lonely, that you are going to leave anyway, so there is no point in getting attached. But I care about you anyway. I care about you so much it terrifies me." He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands coming up to frame her face. "I have been trying not to care about you too, trying and failing miserably. Every day I tell myself I should just move on before this gets complicated, but I cannot make myself leave. I do not want to leave." "Then do not," she whispered. "Stay. I am a drifter with nothing to my name. I have no land, no money, no prospects. I cannot give you what Thomas did. I do not want what Thomas gave me. I want you, just you." He kissed her then, and it was like nothing Annabelle had ever experienced. Thomas's kisses had been pleasant, affectionate, but this was fire and hunger and need. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with everything she had been holding inside for months. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. Dalton rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right. I do not want people to talk about you, to say things that hurt your reputation. Let them talk. I am done living my life based on what other people think. Still," he pulled back slightly, "I want to court you properly. I want to marry you before anything else happens." The word marry sent a thrill through her. "Is that a proposal?" "It is, if you will have me. I know it is fast, and I know I have nothing to offer you but my labor and my heart, but they are both yours if you want them." "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her again, softer this time, full of promise and tenderness. When he left to return to the bunkhouse, Annabelle closed the door and leaned against it, her heart so full she thought it might burst. She had not expected this, had not expected to fall in love again, especially not so soon and not with someone so different from Thomas. But Dalton had somehow slipped past all her defenses and made her feel alive again. They told no one at first, keeping their engagement secret while they made plans. Dalton wanted to speak to the minister and arrange things properly, but they both knew that once word got out, Jake Brennan would escalate his campaign to force her off her land. A widow was vulnerable, but a widow about to remarry was a problem that needed to be dealt with quickly. They decided to marry quietly, with just the minister and a witness present. Then, once they were legally bound, they would announce it publicly and dare Brennan to keep pushing. The wedding took place on a Saturday morning in early November, in the small church on the edge of El Paso. Sheriff Morrison agreed to stand as witness, much to Annabelle's surprise. The ceremony was simple, just the exchange of vows and rings that Dalton had somehow managed to buy despite having almost no money. The ring he slipped on her finger was a simple gold band with a tiny chip of turquoise set in it, and Annabelle thought it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister said. "You may kiss your bride." Dalton pulled her close and kissed her thoroughly, right there in front of God and the minister and the sheriff. When they broke apart, Annabelle was blushing and smiling so wide her cheeks hurt. They rode back to the ranch together, and this time Dalton did not go to the bunkhouse. He carried Annabelle over the threshold of the house that was now theirs, and she laughed at the foolish romance of it even as her heart soared. "Welcome home, Mr. Jackson," she said. "That sounds strange. Nobody has ever called me that before. You had better get used to it. You are stuck with me now." He kissed her again, and this time there was no reason to stop, no propriety to maintain. They made it as far as the bedroom, pulling at each other's clothes with clumsy eagerness. What followed was both awkward and wonderful, full of whispered promises and tender discoveries. This was different from her nights with Thomas, more raw and passionate but also more connected, as if their souls were reaching for each other even as their bodies joined. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, Dalton's arm around her waist and her head on his chest. Annabelle traced idle patterns on his skin, feeling more content than she had in years. "I love you," she said quietly. "I need you to know that. This is not just about protection or keeping the ranch. I love you. I love you too." He kissed the top of her head. "I did not think I would ever say those words to anyone, did not think anyone would want a man like me. A man like you is exactly what I want." They stayed in bed until late afternoon, talking and dozing and exploring each other with the wonder of new lovers. Eventually, hunger drove them to the kitchen, where Annabelle made scrambled eggs and toast while Dalton watched her with a smile that made her feel beautiful despite her tangled hair and wrinkled dress. "We should go into town tomorrow," she said as they ate. "File the marriage certificate with the county clerk and make sure everyone knows. You ready for the talk that is going to cause? Let them talk. You are my husband now, and I am proud of that." His smile widened. "I like hearing you say that. Husband makes it feel real." "It is real. You are stuck with me now, Dalton Jackson. No more drifting." "Good. I am tired of drifting." They went into town the next day, walking down the main street hand in hand. Annabelle could feel the stares, hear the whispers that followed them. The widow Zimmerman and her drifter, married after only 2 months. Scandalous. Improper. Fast. She ignored it all, her chin high and her hand firmly in Dalton's. They filed the marriage certificate at the clerk's office, making their union a matter of public record. Then they stopped at the general store for supplies, where Mr. Peters congratulated them with genuine warmth. "I think it is wonderful," he said. "Everyone deserves happiness, and you two certainly look happy." "We are," Annabelle said, smiling up at Dalton. "Very happy." The real test came when they encountered Jake Brennan on the street. He stood outside his lawyer's office, dressed in his expensive suit, his face going dark when he saw them. "Mrs. Zimmerman," he said, then corrected himself with barely concealed anger. "Mrs. Jackson now, I hear." "That is correct. Married rather quickly, did you not?" "When you know," Dalton said mildly. "Is there something we can help you with, Mr. Brennan?" "I wanted to inform your wife that I have filed a lawsuit regarding the disputed property line between our ranches. But I suppose the notice will have to go to both of you now." Annabelle felt her stomach drop. "There is no disputed property line. The boundaries were surveyed when Thomas and I bought the land. Funny thing about surveys, sometimes they are wrong. My lawyer found some discrepancies that suggest 30 acres of what you think is your land actually belongs to me. We will let the judge sort it out." "This is harassment," Dalton said, his voice hardening. "You know that lawsuit has no merit." Maybe it does, maybe it does not. But it will tie up your property for months, maybe years. Hard to sell cattle or take out loans when the land title is in dispute. Brennan smiled coldly. Have a nice day, Mr. and Mrs. Jackson. He walked away, leaving them standing in the street. Annabelle felt sick. Can he do that? Just sue me over land I legally own. He can file the lawsuit. Whether or not he wins is another matter. Dalton squeezed her hand. Come on, let's go talk to the sheriff. Sheriff Morrison was sympathetic but not encouraging. Brennan has expensive lawyers. Even if you win, the legal fees will probably bankrupt you. That is the point. So what are we supposed to do? Annabelle asked. Just let him harass us until we have no choice but to sell. I will do what I can to keep things legal and above board. But beyond that, my hands are tied unless Brennan breaks the law in a way I can prove. They returned to the ranch feeling defeated. That night, sitting at the kitchen table with Thomas's old ledger and a growing pile of legal notices, Annabelle finally let herself cry. Dalton pulled her into his arms, holding her while she sobbed out her frustration and fear. I do not know how to fight him, she said against his chest. He has money and power and the law on his side. We will figure it out. We have time before the court date and we have each other. That counts for something. Does it? What if I lose everything? What if marrying me was the worst decision you ever made? He pulled back to look at her, his hands gentle on her face. Marrying you was the best decision I ever made. Whatever happens with the ranch, we will face it together. You are not alone anymore. His words steadied her. He was right. She was not alone. Whatever came next, they would handle it as partners. Over the following weeks, they worked harder than ever, trying to prepare for the cattle drive to market. If they could just get the herd sold, they would have enough money to pay off the bank loan and hire a lawyer to fight Brennan's lawsuit. It was a slim hope, but it was all they had. Dalton spent long days riding the fence line, making sure every post was secure and every strand of wire was tight. Annabelle threw herself into preparing for the drive, inventorying supplies and planning the route. They worked from dawn to dusk, falling into bed exhausted each night. But no matter how tired they were, they always found time for each other. Dalton would hold her close as they fell asleep, whispering promises about their future. They talked about expanding the herd once they got through this crisis, about building a bigger house someday, about the children they might have. Those quiet conversations in the darkness kept Annabelle's hope alive. The night before the cattle drive was scheduled to begin, Dalton found her on the porch, staring out at the dark shapes of the cattle in the near pasture. He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and pulled her back against his chest. Cold out here, he said. I could not sleep. Too much on my mind. Me too. He kissed the side of her neck. But we are ready. The cattle are in good shape, the weather looks favorable, and we have a solid plan. We can do this. What if something goes wrong? Then we will deal with it, together. She turned in his arms to face him. I do not tell you enough how grateful I am that you stayed, that you chose me. You do not have to thank me for choosing the best thing that ever happened to me. She kissed him, pouring all her love and fear and hope into it. He responded with equal passion, his hands tangling in her hair. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Come to bed, he said. We have a long day tomorrow. The cattle drive started at dawn, with Annabelle and Dalton pushing 60 head of cattle toward El Paso, where they would meet up with other small ranchers joining forces for the trek to the stockyards in Fort Worth. It was hard, dusty work, made harder by the fact that they were just two people managing a herd that really needed 4 or 5 hands. But they made it work. Dalton had a gift for handling cattle, always seeming to know where a break would happen before it did. Annabelle had learned enough from Thomas and from watching Dalton to hold her own. They worked together with the ease of people who had learned to anticipate each other's movements. They met up with the other ranchers at the planned rendezvous point, and Annabelle was relieved to see several friendly faces. There was old Pete Harmon with his small herd, the widow Carter and her grown son, and 3 other small operators all banding together, because they could not afford to hire professional drovers. The real drive began the next morning, with the combined herd of nearly 200 cattle and a dozen riders. It was slow, dusty, exhausting work. They averaged about 10 miles a day, pushing through the heat and dealing with the dozens of small problems that arose when moving that many animals over rough terrain. Dalton proved invaluable, his experience showing in everything from picking good campsites to doctoring sick cattle. The other ranchers quickly came to respect him, asking his opinion and following his lead. Annabelle felt a fierce pride watching him, seeing him come into his own as more than just a drifter. They were 5 days into the drive when trouble found them again. A group of riders approached their camp just after sunset, and Annabelle recognized Jake Brennan at their head. Her stomach knotted with dread. "Evening," Ray said, staying mounted while his men spread out around the camp. "Heard you folks were pushing cattle to Fort Worth." "We are," Pete Harmon said, stepping forward as the unofficial leader of their group. "Something we can help you with. Just wanted to make sure all this stock is legally owned. Would hate for there to be any confusion about who owns what." "Everything here is properly branded and accounted for," Dalton said, moving to stand beside Pete. "Unless you have some specific accusation, I suggest you ride on. Now, that is not very friendly. We are all neighbors here." "Neighbors do not ride into camps at night with armed men unless they are looking for trouble." The tension ratcheted up another notch. Annabelle saw several of the Brennan men rest their hands on their gun belts. Pete's son and the other ranchers shifted position, ready to back Dalton's play. "We will be checking the brands on these cattle in the morning," Ray said, "just to be sure." "You will stay away from our stock," Pete said firmly. "Now, I am going to ask you politely one time to leave our camp. After that, we will consider you a threat and act accordingly." For a long moment, it seemed like Ray might actually start something. Then he smiled coldly and jerked his horse's head around. "We will be watching," he promised. "One wrong move and we will bury you all." They rode off into the darkness. The camp remained silent for several minutes after they were gone, everyone processing what had just happened. "That was a threat," Widow Carter said finally. "He is going to try something." "Maybe," Dalton said. "Or maybe he is just trying to scare us into making a mistake. Either way, we need to post extra guards tonight and keep a close watch on the herd." They doubled the watch, with armed men on duty all night. Annabelle barely slept, starting at every sound, expecting to hear gunfire or the thunder of stampeding cattle. But the night passed quietly, and morning came without incident. The rest of the drive was uneventful, though they maintained extra vigilance the entire way. When they finally reached Fort Worth 10 days later, Annabelle nearly wept with relief. They had made it. The cattle were intact, and now all they had to do was get them sold. The Fort Worth stockyards were chaos, with cattle and cowboys and buyers everywhere. Dalton navigated it all with surprising ease, finding them a good buyer who offered a fair price. When the deal was finally struck and Annabelle had the bank draft in her hands representing the sale of her cattle, she had to blink back tears. "We did it," she said to Dalton, clutching the precious paper. "We actually did it." "You did it," he corrected. "This is your ranch, your hard work." "Ours," she said firmly. "Our ranch, our hard work, our future." He pulled her into his arms right there in the middle of the stockyard, not caring who saw. "Yeah, ours." They stayed in Fort Worth that night, renting a room at a modest hotel. It was the first time they had been truly alone since the wedding, with no ranch duties demanding attention and no threats hanging over them. They made love slowly, savoring each other, and afterward lay talking about their plans. "First thing, we pay off the bank loan," Annabelle said, her head on Dalton's shoulder. "Then we hire a lawyer to fight Brennan's lawsuit. And we start rebuilding the herd. Maybe we can buy some of Henderson's land if he is still willing to sell. And we fix the roof on the house properly, not just patch it. And maybe we start working on filling that house with kids." Annabelle lifted her head to look at him. "You want children, do you?" "Yes, very much." "Then that is what we will do. Build our ranch, raise our family, grow old together." "That sounds perfect." They returned to El Paso 3 days later, and Annabelle immediately paid off her bank loan. The relief of having that debt cleared was enormous. With the remaining money, they hired a lawyer, a sharp young man named William Foster, who had recently set up practice in town and was eager to take on Jake Brennan. "The lawsuit has no merit," Foster told them after reviewing the case. "Your property boundaries are clearly documented and have been recognized by the county for years. Brennan is just harassing you." "Can you get it dismissed?" Dalton asked. "I can certainly try. But these things take time, and Brennan's lawyer is going to drag it out as long as possible." "How long are we talking?" "Could be 6 months. Could be a year." Annabelle sighed. "At least we can afford to wait now. We have time to rebuild before we need to worry about money again." The lawsuit dragged on through the winter and into spring, a constant presence in the back of their minds, but no longer the desperate threat it had been. Life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Dalton proved to be not just a good ranch hand but a skilled manager, making improvements and decisions that increased their efficiency and productivity. They bought breeding stock from several neighbors, slowly rebuilding their herd. Dalton traded work for cattle with Pete Harmon and the widow Carter, building relationships with the other small ranchers in the area. What had started as a defensive alliance during the cattle drive became a genuine community of mutual support. In March, Annabelle realized she was pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Dalton, and when she finally did, his joy was so pure and complete that it made her cry. "We are going to have a baby," he said, his hand on her still flat stomach, wonder in his voice. "I am going to be a father." "A good father," she said. "The best father." "I do not know anything about being a father." "Then we will figure it out together." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Annabelle continued working on the ranch, though Dalton insisted she take on lighter duties as she grew bigger. He was protective without being overbearing, making sure she rested and ate enough and did not overwork herself. The lawsuit finally went to court in May, just as Annabelle entered her 6th month of pregnancy. She sat beside Dalton in the courtroom, her hand in his, as William Foster argued their case. Jake Brennan sat across the aisle with his expensive lawyer, radiating cold confidence, but Foster was good. He presented clear documentation of their property boundaries, brought in the surveyor who had done the original work, and systematically dismantled every argument Brennan's lawyer made. When the judge finally ruled in their favor, dismissing the lawsuit with prejudice and ordering Brennan to pay their legal fees, Annabelle felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had been carrying for nearly a year. Outside the courthouse, Jake Brennan approached them one last time. "This is not over," he said, his face tight with rage. "Yes, it is," Dalton replied calmly. "The court has ruled. The land is ours, legally and permanently. You have no more moves to make, Brennan. Let it go. A drifter and a widow playing at ranching, you will fail eventually." "Maybe we will," Annabelle said, her hand on her swollen belly. "But it will be our failure on our land living our lives. You have no power over us anymore." Brennan's jaw clenched, but he had no response. He turned and walked away, and Annabelle knew with deep certainty that it was finally over. Whatever threat he had posed was neutralized. They were free. Their son was born in late August during a fierce thunderstorm that shook the house and made the windows rattle. The local midwife, Mrs. Patterson, attended the birth along with the widow Carter, and after 12 hours of hard labor, Annabelle delivered a healthy baby boy with a strong set of lungs and his father's blue eyes. Dalton held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" Annabelle asked, exhausted but happy. "I have been thinking about that. What about Samuel, after my father? Samuel Jackson, I like it." She watched her husband with their son, the tender way he cradled the baby against his chest, and felt her heart overflow with love. This was what she had been fighting for, not just the land but this, a family, a future, a home. The years that followed were good ones, better than Annabelle had dared to hope for in those dark days after Thomas's death. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Dalton's instincts and Annabelle's careful planning proved to be a powerful combination. They expanded slowly but steadily, buying the Henderson property when the old man retired, adding to their herd, improving their stock. Samuel grew into a bright, curious boy who loved following his father around the ranch. When he was 3, Annabelle gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth, a tiny thing with her mother's dark hair and stubborn chin. 2 years later came another son, Matthew, who was quieter than his siblings but had a gift for working with animals. They built the bigger house they had dreamed of, with bedrooms for all the children and a wide porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sun set over their land. Dalton never spoke about leaving, never showed any sign of restlessness. He had found his place, his purpose, his home. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they held a celebration, inviting all the neighboring ranchers and families who had become their friends. Pete Harmon was there, older now but still spry. The widow Carter came with her son and his new wife. Sheriff Morrison attended, retired now but still a presence in the community. Even William Foster came, having established himself as one of the most successful lawyers in West Texas. As the party wound down and the children were put to bed, Annabelle and Dalton found themselves alone on their porch, just as they had been so many nights before. She leaned against him, his arm around her waist, and watched the stars come out. "You ever regret it?" she asked, settling down. "Giving up the freedom of the road?" "Never, not once." He kissed the top of her head. "I spent years drifting, looking for something without knowing what it was. Turns out I was looking for you for a place to belong. I am glad you found me. I am glad you gave me a chance." A desperate widow and a drifter with nothing to his name, we should not have worked by any reasonable measure. But we did work. We do work. "Yeah," his arm tightened around her. "We really do." They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the land they had built together, the home they had created, the life they had fought for. It had not been easy, but it had been worth every struggle, every fear, every moment of doubt. Somewhere in the house, one of the children cried out in their sleep, and Annabelle stirred to go check on them. But Dalton held her back for just a moment, turning her to face him in the starlight. "I love you," he said, as he had said 1,000 times before and would say 1,000 times more. "Thank you for giving me a reason to stop drifting." "I love you too," she replied. "Thank you for giving me a reason to keep fighting." He kissed her, tender and sweet, a promise of all the years still to come. Then they went inside together, to their children and their home and their life. The ranch continued to grow over the years. Samuel, Elizabeth, and Matthew all grew up knowing hard work, and the satisfaction of building something with their own hands. Samuel showed an aptitude for business and took over more of the management as he got older. Elizabeth had her mother's determination and became one of the finest horsewomen in the county. Matthew fulfilled his early promise with animals, developing a reputation as someone who could gentle the wildest horse. When Samuel turned 20, he married a schoolteacher from town, a smart young woman named Rebecca who fit seamlessly into the family. They built a house on the eastern section of the ranch, planning to work the land as partners with Dalton and Annabelle. Elizabeth eventually fell in love with the son of a neighboring rancher, combining two successful operations when they married. Matthew chose to remain at the main house, content to work alongside his father and help manage the growing operation. Jake Brennan never troubled them again. He died in 1895, and his ranch was divided among his children, none of whom showed much interest in continuing their father's vendetta. Ray Brennan moved to California, and the rest of the family sold off most of their holdings. The Brennan empire that had once seemed so threatening crumbled within a generation. The Jackson Ranch, by contrast, thrived. By the time Dalton and Annabelle celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary, they owned over 1,000 acres and ran one of the most successful cattle operations in West Texas. But more important than the land or the cattle or the money was the family they had built and the love that remained as strong as ever. Annabelle was 48 now, her dark hair streaked with silver, laugh lines crinkling around her eyes. Dalton, at 52, had weathered into a lean, tanned man whose blue eyes still made her heart flutter. They had built a good life together, filled with hard work and love and the satisfaction of accomplishment. One evening in late summer, they sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. The children were grown now, scattered across the ranch in their own homes but still close, still part of the fabric of their lives. Annabelle leaned her head on Dalton's shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "You remember when we first met?" she asked. "You sitting outside the general store, looking like you had nowhere to go and no reason to get there. I remember thinking you were the bravest woman I had ever seen, standing there asking a stranger to work for nothing but room and board, not knowing if I would rob you blind or worse. I took a chance, best chance either of us ever took." They sat in companionable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and purple. Grandchildren's laughter drifted from one of the nearby houses, and somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed in the evening cool. "I never thanked Thomas," Annabelle said softly, "for buying this land, for giving me something worth fighting for. Without him, I would never have been here, never have met you. You think he would approve of us? I think he would be happy that I found love again. He was a good man. He deserved to be remembered well. Then we will make sure he is. We will tell our grandchildren about him, about how he built the foundation of all this." Annabelle smiled. "That sounds right." The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow as all years do. Dalton and Annabelle welcomed grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. They watched the world change around them, with new technologies and new ways of doing things, but the ranch remained a constant, a piece of land that belonged to them as much as they belonged to it. When Annabelle was 65, she fell ill with a persistent fever. The doctor came from town, but there was little he could do except make her comfortable. Dalton sat beside her bed for 3 days, holding her hand, refusing to leave her side. "You should rest," she told him, her voice weak. "The ranch needs you. The ranch can wait. You are what I need." "I am not going anywhere, stubborn man. It is just a fever." But they both knew it was more than that. Her breathing was labored, her skin hot to the touch. Dalton prayed, something he had not done since he was a child, bargaining with God for just a few more years with the woman who had given him everything. The fever broke on the fourth day. Annabelle woke weak but clear-eyed, and Dalton wept with relief. The doctor said it was a miracle, that he had been certain they would lose her. But Annabelle Jackson was tougher than she looked, tougher than illness or hardship or any of the challenges life had thrown at her. She recovered slowly, and Dalton hovered like a mother hen until she threatened to hit him with a broom if he did not give her space to breathe. But even after she was back on her feet, helping with the ranch work as she always had, something had changed. They both knew how fragile life was, how quickly it could be taken away. They treasured their time together even more than before. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a massive celebration. It seemed like half the county showed up, filling the ranch with laughter and music and food. Dalton and Annabelle stood together, surrounded by their family and friends, and gave a toast. 40 years ago, Dalton said, his arm around his wife, I was a drifter with nothing to my name and no idea where I was going. Then I met a widow who needed help and was brave enough to trust a stranger. She gave me a chance, and in doing so, she gave me everything. I needed protection, Annabelle added, smiling up at him, and he needed purpose. Neither of us expected forever, but we got it anyway. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Their children and grandchildren surrounded them, and Dalton pulled Annabelle close, kissing her soundly in front of everyone. She laughed against his lips, feeling younger than she had in years. That night, after everyone had gone home and the ranch was quiet again, they returned to their porch. It had become something of a ritual over the years, this quiet time together at the end of the day. Dalton poured them each a small glass of whiskey, and they sat in their old rocking chairs, watching the stars. 40 years, Annabelle mused. It does not feel that long. Some days it feels like just yesterday you showed up at that general store. Other days it feels like I have known you my whole life. You have made me very happy, Dalton Jackson. You have done the same for me, Annabelle Jackson, more than you will ever know. They reached across the space between their chairs, their hands finding each other with the ease of long practice. Their fingers intertwined, calloused and work-worn but still strong, still capable of holding on tight. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The land stretched out around them, dark and peaceful. Somewhere in the house behind them, a clock chimed the hour. And Dalton and Annabelle sat together, hand in hand, content in the life they had built and the love they had found. Years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of seasons. Dalton and Annabelle grew older but remained active, still involved in running the ranch even as they gradually turned more responsibility over to their children. They had both lived longer than either had expected, blessed with good health and good fortune. When Dalton was 75, he took a bad fall from his horse. Nothing was broken, but it shook him, made him realize that he was not the young man he had once been. He became more careful, more willing to let others do the heavy work. Annabelle, at 72, developed arthritis in her hands that made some tasks difficult. But she adapted, finding new ways to contribute. They took to spending more time on their porch, watching the world go by with the earned relaxation of people who had worked hard all their lives and had nothing left to prove. Their great-grandchildren would visit, climbing into their laps to hear stories about the old days, when Grandpa Dalton was a drifter and Grandma Annabelle was a widow fighting to keep her ranch. "Tell us about when you fell in love," one of the little girls would ask, and Dalton would exchange a look with Annabelle, a whole conversation passing between them in a glance. "It was not one moment," Annabelle would say. "It was 1,000 little moments, adding up to something neither of us expected. "But we are very glad it happened," Dalton would add, reaching for his wife's hand. On a crisp autumn evening when Dalton was 78 and Annabelle was 75, they sat on their porch watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before. The ranch spread out before them, golden in the dying light. Their children and grandchildren lived all around them, carrying on the legacy they had built. The land was secure, the family was thriving, and everything they had fought for had been achieved and more. "You ever think about that day in El Paso?" Annabelle asked, her hand in Dalton's. "When I asked a complete stranger to work for practically nothing. I think about it all the time. Best decision I ever made, saying yes. Best decision I ever made, asking. We were so young, so scared, though we tried not to show it. We were brave, though, or foolish, maybe both." Dalton laughed, the sound warm and familiar. "Definitely both. But it worked out, did it not? Better than I ever dreamed possible." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. The evening was cool and peaceful, perfect in its simplicity. "I love you," Dalton said, as he had said countless times over their 50-plus years together. "I will always love you." "And I love you," Annabelle replied, "forever and always." The sun set completely, and stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of family, their youngest granddaughter helping prepare supper, her husband tending to their children. The sounds of life continuing, of legacy carrying forward. Dalton and Annabelle stayed on the porch a while longer, hands clasped, hearts full. They had started as two people who needed each other for practical reasons, a widow needing protection and a drifter needing purpose. Neither had expected forever. But they had found it anyway in each other's arms, on this land they had fought so hard to keep. And as the years continued to pass, that love remained constant, a foundation as solid as the earth beneath them. They had built something lasting, something real, something that would endure long after they were gone. They had found their forever, and it was better than either of them could have imagined. When Dalton Jackson passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, Annabelle held his hand and whispered goodbye to the man who had given her everything. She grieved deeply, but without regret, knowing that they had made the most of every single day they had been given together. She lived another 3 years, surrounded by the family they had created, on the land they had fought so hard to keep. And when her time came, she went peacefully, her last thoughts of Dalton and the day she had been brave enough to ask a stranger for help. Their great-grandchildren still work the ranch today, carrying on the legacy of the widow who needed protection and the drifting cowboy who needed purpose. The story of how they met, how they fell in love, and how they built an empire from nothing but hard work and determination has become family legend, passed down through generations as a testament to what is possible when two people choose each other, against all odds, and fight for their forever.